Welcome to Sisters in Crime's Murder Monday, where authors talk about their crime craft. My name is Jacq. I'm a bibliophile, copywriter, podcaster, and member of Sisters in Crime Australia, where we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. My guest for this month's Murder Monday is Vikki Petraitis, who hails from Melbourne. Hey, Vicky, how you going?
I'm excellent, but it's a bit cold today. It started off nice and then it just turned cold. Melbourne.
Melbourne weather. Vicky has a long association with crime, starting with the Phillip Island murder in 94, which she co-wrote with Paul Daly. Since then, she's written another 17 true crime books, but last year she crossed over to fiction with The Unbelieved. Now, it won the inaugural Allen and Unwin Crime Fiction Award, and it also went on to be published to much acclaim. Vicky is hugely popular as a speaker, a former Sisters in Crime convener. Her Case File Presents podcast, The Vanishing of Vivienne Cameron and Searching for Sarah McDermott, have together been downloaded more than 3 million times. And her latest podcast, The Frankston Murders, only released 2 weeks ago and has already had, as we record today, over 900,000 downloads, something us microfiction podcasters can only dream of. Vicky, how about we just kick this off with an elevator pitch for The Unbelieved, which is crime fiction?
Oh, well, from a true crime author's point of view, the elevator pitch for me would be that I took 30 years of writing true crime and I pushed every single thing that made me furious and every single thing that I thought needed a spotlight. I squeezed them all into the book, and the true crime experience seeped onto every page.
Oh,
that was a short elevator ride. I think we only went one floor.
Yeah. That's okay, because if it does the job, it does the job. And I have to say that I picked up a copy, and I have been ignoring all my jobs I've been meaning to do in order to read it. But we do have our questions. They've been shuffled. So we'll start off with, what's the hardest thing you've had to write about?
The hardest thing, because I used to be a teacher, so I reckon school reports. Everything else, everything else is pretty easy compared to that.
You don't have the fallback, hasn't reached their potential, needs work on their handwriting. I'm just going through my school reports now.
We used to have this joke that there was, I think, a Benny Hill episode where Benny Hill was dating, and this other guy is competing for a woman's affection, and he goes, "I've got strong white teeth," and Benny Hill says, "I've got strong white teeth," and then the other guy says, "I'm a millionaire," and Benny Hill says, "I've got strong white teeth." So that kind of became like when a teacher's going, "Oh, what am I going to say about this kid?" And I'd say, "He's got strong white teeth." I don't know if that gets into school reports, but no, actually, I quite enjoyed writing school reports because I, as a writer, the words flowed, and I would always kind of tell the story of the child. Maybe proofreading school reports, that was a bit torturous. What is hard to write about? I don't really find anything hard to write about because the subject areas that I write, it's so challenging all the time that I think I'm just so used to it that any I can write about anything.
Wow. Okay. Are you tempted to put too many facts into your fiction?
Well, according to some reviewers, I do put too many facts in. There's I'm not really sure what they mean by it, but there's a couple of reviews that say The Unbelieved is didactic, and I think that means I don't know, preachy or too factual or whatever, but so according to some, I do. I don't know. The Unbelieved was a PhD novel, and so it had to have certain, in my mind, it had to have certain parameters, and it had to tell that story of of sexual assault and of really low conviction rates and misogyny, and this casual misogyny in the workplace. So I guess, that kind of seeps in as well. Most people like it. I guess you always get those reviewers, don't you? I had one reviewer, I don't know, probably an old colleague of mine, I suppose, but they're all anonymous, of course. But, I've read better better pieces from Year 9 students, and I thought, I've read a lot of Year 9 pieces and none of them are this good.
None of them are that long.
None of them are that long, but none of them. I've been teaching, taught for 31 years and read a lot of Year 9 work. No, that's not correct.
That's fair enough.
Maybe they work in a school for brilliant author Year 9s.
They could have a whole class full of, wonderful kids who are on the precipice of being published themselves.
They very well might.
What triggers you to write on a particular theme?
The themes I think that I've always written about are recurring. So the themes of child sexual abuse, sexual abuse of women, low conviction rates, resilience is a really important theme that I write about consistently. And I'm always looking for that in my stories.
Yeah.
So if I interview somebody, and everyone that I interview pretty much has had terrible things happen to them. But it's not about that. It's not about the moment of horror. It is about what you do with it and what you learn from it. That's what I'm fascinated with. Yeah. And I think if the people that I interview have these awful things happen to them, but are able to use them in a way that says, how can I power my way forward through learning from this experience? I'm fascinated by that. That is definitely a recurring theme.
Oh, here's a question that I think we've already covered. Do you ever worry about being preachy? I think we've covered it, though.
I don't ever worry about it, because what I think, and I guess a lot of writers are like this, right? So I write the story that I need to write, and I do not think about the audience. I don't think about, will people think I'm being preachy, or will people think I'm weird, or whatever. Working in this crime space, you have to be very focused on the story. And so, look, I've been in a book club for 25 years, and I know from experience that very few books, maybe only 2, have ever pleased the entire group of 12 ladies, right?
That's pretty impressive, too.
I know, right? 2. And I think one was Kate Morton's The Secret Garden, or no, The Secret, maybe it was The Distant Hours. Well, Kate Morton's going to please everyone. And I think Leanne Moriarty's Big Little Lies. But all the rest of them, I loved it, hated it, couldn't finish it. That's usually me, just because I'm too busy. But, you can't please everybody. And I think if you sit down as an author and you try and please people, you go nuts. And so I don't really think about how I sound. With The Unbelieved, I hope that your editor is working at the other end to make you sound even better. So I guess if you were a bit preachy, she'd go, that's a bit preachy. So, but I never worry about how I sound. I never think about how I sound. Yeah.
Okay, next question. What triggers you to write about a particular story?
So a particular story, it has to have a certain ingredient or a certain thing that will jump out at me. So, for example, I wrote a book called Salvation, and it was about a guy called Rod Braybon, who was in a Salvation Army boys' home in the 1950s. And he got in touch through a mutual friend. And he said to me that he ended up in Pentridge prison when he was 16. And he said to me, for stealing cars. And he said to me, Pentridge was like a bloody holiday camp compared to the Bayswater Boys' Home. And that was my hook. I went, okay, I'm doing this book. Sometimes it's just that. It's like if this man who did jail time and who ended up pulling himself up by the bootstraps and making a life for himself after this horrendous abuse suffered at the hands of the Salvation Army, who had refused to apologize. That was another thing. And I just thought, I've got to meet this guy. I've got to find out what's happening with this story. And so I wrote, I think one of the books that I was most moved by was his story. And so that can be, I think a writer gets we get a lot of people saying, oh, you should write that book, you should write this book, but they take a year, right? So I have to be really very involved in the subject. I need a lot of documentation. I need the availability of people to talk to. So usually if the family are keen to have the story written, if the story has enough elements that can sustain a book, I had a murder close to where I lived a couple of years ago, and people were saying, "Oh, will you write that book?" I was like, "Well, it was guys fighting, and one of them didn't survive." So that, that's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy for the people involved and the family,
Yeah.
but it can't sustain a book. So usually if you're writing true crime, it has to have lots of elements like, and then. So Phillip Island, of course, and the Frankston case, they have those kind of elements, but I don't know, it has to resonate, doesn't it? It has to be a theme that I want to write about, or it has to have some element that I say, "Oh, I need to do that."
Which leads directly onto the next question, funnily enough. Why did you start writing true crime?
Well, I think you start out as a writer, wanting to be a writer. So
Yeah.
if you are drawn to the typewriter in the olden days, or if you're drawn to the keyboard or the fancy notepad, it really is just a matter of deciding which genre, isn't it? So if you're going to do that writing thing, and if that's the siren's call, then it's really about genre. And I always wanted to write fiction, funnily enough, crime fiction. And then as a 19-year-old, when I sat down to do that, I realized I didn't know why people committed crimes, because I was very young and incredibly naive. And so I started reading true crime because I'd read all of the Agatha Christie's. And if I just tilt my thing, you can see the many, many books on the shelf. But, I started reading Agatha Christie and literally wanted to write that kind of murder mystery set in Melbourne. And so when I realized, I wanted a female killer, and I realized, I don't know why people would commit murder. So I bought a book called How Inside the Mind of a Murderess, about Myra Hindley. And once you start reading true crime, it's really hard to then go back to The Body in the Library and who done it. That the kind of Agatha Christie, which I loved, but true crime had an element of power, a layer of power that fiction just at that stage for me did not have. And so then it became, well, this is what I want to write. I want to write this powerful stuff. And that's where it started.
How do you get on with the police?
In the early days, because true crime was not a genre that was popular here. I had been to America in 1989. Every bookstore that I walked into, because I collected, as you saw from my bookshelves, I collected true crime. But, you would walk into a bookstore in America and all of the rows nearest to the door were all true crime. Like I knew that the genre had legs. It was huge in America. But it didn't have legs here. I think there was Tom Noble's Untold Violence about kind of Dennis Allen and the family that went on to be involved in Walsh Street. And pretty much Andrew Rule's Cuckoo. There really was nothing on the shelves that if you wanted to read about a crime that happened in Melbourne, that you could go to the bookstore and do it. Like there was very little. And so I, despite that, that was the genre that I wanted to do. So the Phillip Island case, I heard about it at Teacher Professional Development and just went, oh my God, that I have to write that book. And just that's where it started. I was quite young, and just my dogged pursuit of, I got to do this. It paid off in the end.
And approaching the police?
Oh, so approaching the police, I would ring them and say, oh, I'm an author, and can I come and talk to you? And they go, all right. And this is we didn't have a police media unit back in those days. I was really lucky that I had some senior police officers who really loved the work that I was doing, because a lot of the work that I was doing was really promoting police work. And so I had a couple of people say, oh yeah, we're happy to read the stories for you and give them the okay. And the fact that I was doing a ride along with the Frankston police during the Frankston serial murders, I don't know that you can do that these days. I don't think that you could get into the back of a police car. But in those days it was, can I do a ride along? Sure.
Wow.
Very different times.
Have you ever been threatened about what you're writing or what you have written?
Yeah, I think if you get a lot of true crime authors together, you compare your death threats. Look, I had one where one day, I think it was like a counselor or a psychologist had called me and said, look, Vicky, a man has been brought into our facility. He was caught jumping naked on the roof of a police car, and clutched in his hand was a flyer for a talk that you're doing at the local library. And we're just letting you know that, he's issued threats, but we're going to keep him in there until after the talk is over at least, and recommending that the library has security. So it's like, okay, fair enough. But I think you have to be a little bit fearless doing this work, because if you were worried about people coming after you, or if you were worried about potential consequences, you wouldn't be able to do it. So I think I do tend to sail through and not really give that a lot of thought, because
that's amazing.
Yeah, that's just one of the times. But you have to look. I'm aware of it. And particularly we're fighting really hard against the parole for Paul Denyer. But realistically, if Denyer was released, I know that he doesn't like me, and I kind of, in an idle moment, thought, well, I don't know, do I have to get a pearl-handled revolver, or does it have to match your shoes? I don't know. Like, are there fashion guns? Are there anything with glitter? I don't know. Like, what would I do if he was released? Because I think I could potentially be a target, but just that's part of the course, I suppose.
Okay, second last question. How do you cope with knowing some of the things that you've researched?
I think when you're a writer, the really good thing about writing is that if someone tells you something awful or something distressing, what you do with that is that you sit down and you process it in your mind into the story. So you give it this is what happened, but you also give it, this is what it meant, this is the impact that it had, this was the follow-on, this was the ripple effect. So I think what you're doing all the time is you're processing stuff, and then and then you're thinking it out. This is how this is how me as a writer, this is how I operate. I process through writing. But of course, what happened with the Unbelieved is that I put a lot of the things that really had stuck with me, I put it into the Unbelieved. But also what I did is I put in a lot of the misogyny that I had experienced as not so much as a female crime writer, because I think my audiences have always been really respectful, but I worked in the education system, and oh boy, that was a shocker. So what would happen is, if I would have an encounter with a man, and that was designed to make me feel like I was nothing and had no skills and whatever, part of my feminist brain would be furious, but the writer brain is going, this is gold. I'm totally stealing that language. And this is how you process it. So a lot of what happened in the Unbelieved, and women say, oh, I really resonated with this story. And it's like, this is because the language of the misogyny I stole from people who offered it to me. Maybe not stole, they gave it to me, and I took it. And then I recycled it. So there was a lot of the scenes in that book are actually recycled scenes that I have experienced firsthand. And so I have this cup that says, don't annoy the writer or she'll put you in a book and kill you. But, don't annoy the writer, or don't treat the writer like she's nothing, because she will steal your words and they will seep into her best-selling novel.
And the final question, it's like, I think some people would take that as a mark of, intimacy. And that's not the right way.
I'm not the only one that does this, because I was on a panel, and so I think someone asked that question, and all the writers are going, absolutely, fair game. So, you be careful of all of us. We are dangerous.
And a very quick final question: how would you get away with murder?
How, this is a surprisingly common conversation among crime writers. There's a member of Sisters in Crime, Maggie, who I love cornering her, and she has a background in, biology and chemistry, and so she's really good for the chemical kind of things. I also have another pharmacist. So, look, getting away with murder, I personally wouldn't murder anyone because I would find that really awful. But I think that in the Unbelieved, if somebody goes off a cliff, and that's really hard to prove. So, that's probably the easiest way. I've heard, and I probably shouldn't say this, I'll say it anyway, but when I was working on stories with the major collision investigation unit, and they would, they had cases where like a guy would be driving and want to get rid of his wife, and he would line up her side of the car with a tree or whatever, and at the last minute unsnap her seatbelt, so things like that. That's awful. But, the accident squad knew this, so they're not really getting away with it.
Wow.
Can you get away with it? Yeah. Don't talk about it, maybe. Don't say a word to anyone. Because I know if I told my mum, she would totally tell everyone. My daughter got away with murder. Thanks, Mama. Not now. Yeah.
Thank you, Vicky. That's incredible. I mean, I'm off to listen to the podcast, and I'm going to finish The Unbelieved, which has actually had me putting off all my jobs I've had planned for the weekend. Murder Monday interviews are available on Sisters in Crime YouTube channel at 6 p.m. once a month on a Monday, and The Unbelieved is available at your favorite bookstore or library right now. Vicky, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on Murder Monday.